From Relay, this is Upgrade, episode 557, recorded March 28th, 2025, released March 31st. We're recording this a little bit early. I am one of your regular hosts, of course, Jason Snell. Mike Hurley continues to be on assignment. His assignment is paternity leave this time. And with me this week, on a show brought to you by Google Gemini and Ecamm, by the way. Haha, see, got it in there. I'm going to totally get this nailed by the time Mike comes back. It is my compatriot at Six Colors, as well as the host of Clockwise here on Relay, The Rebound, off on its own on The Rebound, and many other podcasts over at The Incomparable. It's Dan Moren. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jason. I'd say it's so nice to talk to you unusually, but we talk pretty frequently.
Yeah, this is, for those who do not know, we are weekly on, actually on Fridays when we're recording this, we do the Six Colors podcast, which is for Six Colors members only. And people seem to like it. Actually, I get great feedback and praise for that podcast.
Every once in a while we break some news. You know how it goes.
Oh, I mean, every now and then somebody quotes us on a site, and it's weird. But this time we are talking on what will be a regular episode of Upgrade. They're all a little bit different with Mike gone, but that's fine. We like to start though with a Snell Talk question. I know you love it. I'm going to ask you to chip in here after I answer this question.
Prepared.
From Javier, who says, does Jason have any Star Trek related memorabilia or collectibles? If so, which is his favorite and why? Javier, there was a time in my life when this would have been the most embarrassing question possible, because
now
having grown up loving Star Trek, you get to that point when you're sort of like, I would say, a high school student, and you start to realize that everybody thinks you're a gigantic nerd because you're a gigantic nerd, and you're like, oh no, just deny it. Deny that you're a gigantic nerd. Throw away all your stuff and pretend that you're not a gigantic nerd. Here's a pro tip, kids. It doesn't help.
No, it doesn't hide anything.
It does not hide anything at all. Anyway, during this period, I think when I graduated from high school, maybe, or thereabouts, my parents gave me what I still have, and I'm now, for the watchers on YouTube, I'm holding in my hand, which is a Franklin Mint pewter USS Enterprise. It probably cost a lot of money. It's beautiful. And I was super embarrassed when they gave it to me, which is funny because I still have it. And now I think it's really beautiful.
Nice.
And the problem is that it came, because the USS Enterprise is meant to only fly in space and not be in Earth's atmosphere, even though it is in Earth's atmosphere in a few things. It had a stand. It was a little stand, sort of shaped like the Starfleet symbol. And that broke off. And the problem now is that I love this thing and would like to kind of have it on a stand, and I can't because it broke off. It's actually, the part of the stand is still stuck in there. I might be able to get that out.
Well, then,
I'm
gonna recruit our pal John Moltz and his 3D printer and print yourself a new stand.
Like, John Moltz might be up for this because he is a Star Trek fan, but I'm going to throw it out to the wider Upgrade community. If somebody would like to work with me to figure out how to build maybe a 3D printed stand, or a partially 3D printed stand, maybe the piece that's coming out of the ship needs to be 3D printed because it's a specific shape, but then it could be on something heavier so it doesn't tip over. Anyway, upgradefeedback.com, because it is beautiful and I'm no longer embarrassed by it. And in fact, it's a very sweet thing my parents did for their nerdy son. So that all said, it's not my favorite Star Trek related memorabilia. In the year 2000, I went to a wedding. It's actually our friends Philip Michaels and Lisa Schmeizer's wedding in Las Vegas, and the Star Trek experience was still in Las Vegas then, where you could go and there was like a bar. You could have like Romulan ale or Klingon blood ale, which were just beer with food coloring.
Sure.
I had the Klingon blood ale. And there was a little experience you had where you were on the bridge of the Next Generation Enterprise. And in the gift shop, because there's always a gift shop,
of course,
there was a very simple product that yet I just loved it at the time, and I still love it to this day. It's just a teddy bear, but it's a teddy bear wearing Captain Kirk's uniform from the original series. I love him. He's the best. I always have him on a shelf somewhere nearby because He's just adorable. And so the Captain Kirk bear is my favorite Star Trek memorabilia. Now, Dan, I have to ask you, you're a big Star Wars fan. I know you're also a Star Trek fan, because nerds. What's your favorite piece of memorabilia or collectible?
Well, let me throw this out for you. A couple things. One, I do remember when I was a kid, there was an exhibit at the Science Museum that was a Star Trek TNG exhibit and here in Boston, and my parents took me. And the only thing I remember about it really is I bought it was like a lanyard with a badge, like an ID badge on it, and I bought a Geordie one. So I had a Geordie little ID badge on a lanyard that I loved. No idea where that is now. I also had a little like toy phaser and a toy tricorder from TNG, both of which I like. I still have the tricorder. I don't really know where the phaser is. And recently, I've also acquired a communicator, old school TOS communicator, and a badge, Strange New World style or non-com badge, but insignia.
Yeah, badge.
That's been my Halloween costume the last couple of years. I shirt and I have the badge. But my favorite piece of Star Trek memorabilia is I got given probably circa 1993 a mug that has it's from the NCC 171A. It's part of it's the official China, sort of style, but it's like a mug with the Starfleet insignia on it. On the back, it says USS Enterprise NCC 1701A. And it's a Pfaltzgraff mug. I still have it. I still drink from it on the regular.
Amazing.
And then I was amazed to discover that our pal John Moltz has one as well, and his broke, and he found another one on eBay. So I worry about the day when that goes, and I won't be able to find it because John has already bought the replacement.
He bought your replacement.
He bought my replacement. Oh, no. On the Star Wars side, people who are watching the video can see behind me I have a bookcase here, which has a bunch of stuff on it, Legos and some toys and stuff. I do have a nice Chewbacca sock monkey up there somewhere, which you can't quite see. But recently, about a year and a half ago, my wife and I went to Disney World, and I got to go to Galaxy's Edge for the first time, and I built my own custom lightsaber. Now, I built one in the past that's like the plastic pieces that you screw together and they're in a big bin when you go there. But this time we splashed out for the experience. You go and have within a room with 20 other people, and there's a whole like show as you pick your pieces, and they're metal. So you can also see behind me right here on my bookcase, that is my lightsaber, my custom lightsaber that I built. It is quite heavy. It weighs several pounds because it is made of solid metal, and it has in it, it's got a little switch, and you can flick the switch, and it has a blade that's not currently screwed in because otherwise it would be really hard to store. It lights up, and inside of it there are crystals that you pick during this whole experience that dictate what color it is.
Yes.
But you can get different crystals, swap them in, and it makes different color. It changes the color and it changes the sounds. I was very disturbed at this event when I looked around and realized of the 20 or so people in there, the vast majority chose either purple or red lightsabers. Throw inside, all of you choosing red lightsabers. Then I had green, and there was one person had purple. Everybody else had red and purple. Red, 1% blue. One green, mostly purple and red. And I was like, I don't know what's wrong with.
I don't know. Seems like
Sam Jackson.
Like in the zeitgeist. Seems about right.
Actually, I don't
think about it.
I'm not happy about it. So mine's green, by the way. Mine's green because green's my favorite color, and also because it's very similar to Luke's Return of the Jedi lightsaber.
All right. Okay, that's the nerdiest Snell Talk ever, but it's okay. You asked for Javier, and
Mike's not here for us to get mad at us being nerdy, so we're doing it.
Exactly right. And yes, you can go to search for Upgrade Podcast on YouTube if you want to see us pointing at things behind us or holding things. Not really great audio podcasting, but it's a rare moment where I feel like we had some show and tell there. Maybe I'll find a clip, a frame grab, and stick it in there somewhere. All right, moving on to the fatherly advice segment, where I ask one of our parade of father co-host fill-ins if they have any words of wisdom or observations to impart to Mike early enough in the episode where he's still listening, or he's skipped that previous chapter and has moved on to this chapter.
Straight to the fatherly advice, right in the veins.
What's your advice for Mike?
It's interesting. I am probably, of all your guests, I assume I'm the one with the most recent experience with a very young child. Since
you are,
my kid's only 2.5. So I've been through this in the not too distant past. And so we got a lot of good advice when we were expecting our first kid. Like we had a lot of friends that we asked. And one of my friends I will call out specifically, is a woman named Angel, sent us a really wonderful email that she's like, this is my like standard email I send to people who ask me about this. And it's just really thoughtful and really well-reasoned, all this great advice. And one of the things that stuck in my mind from this is nothing lasts longer than 2 weeks, which is a way of saying anything bad that's happening, your baby's not sleeping, they're not like, oh, they don't like this food, or they're crying about this thing. Like it's frustrating when you're in that moment and you feel like, oh my God, is this my life? Is my life forever this baby not sleeping, or this baby being upset, or not liking this thing or that thing? To which I say, deep breath. Nothing lasts longer than 2 weeks. Now, the flip side of that is nothing good lasts longer than 2 weeks. Either good or bad, nothing lasts longer than 2 weeks. There will be something else. Something else will happen. Something else will change. But it also is a good reason and sort of reminder to slow down and enjoy those things, because, your kid doing something really amazing and cute, you write it down. Like, you will forget. You don't think you'll ever forget how cute that one thing they did was, where they, I don't know, said a word the specific way or crawled over something. And you're like, oh my God, that's so amazing. I'll never forget that. There is a lot going on in your brain right now. Trust me. Write it down. Write yourself a little note. My wife and I have a little file of things where we write down cute stuff that our kid has done, so we can refer back to, oh yeah, remember when he was doing that? And then my second corollary I'll put in there is the pick your battles thing, which I think somebody else mentioned as well, but I think is an important one to stress. And this probably is more of a long-term, less a case when your kid is an infant, but as you hit toddlerhood and realize that there are some very particular, your toddler will be very particular and specific about things that they want to do. And you will be trying to put a jacket on them and get out the door. You will be trying to get them to put their shoes on. You will be trying to get them to eat their vegetables. Just, again, deep breath, relax, think to yourself, is this the hill I want to die on?
Yeah.
And the answer is, if it's not, that's fine. If they're throwing around their food and it's like, I can't get them to eat that, it's fine. It's going to be okay if they miss their vegetables for a day or two. It's totally reasonable. Just decide which of the things that you actually need to get done and do those. Don't worry about everything else. And I think I wanted to refer back also to, I think John Syracuse had a really good one too, about like the, feeling like, having feelings about it and like questioning things and like beating yourself up sometimes, and like you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm having these thoughts or whatever. Forgive yourself, really, I think is another big part of it. Like, go easy on yourself. Like, I definitely had a breakdown, like just a couple weeks into having a kid, where I was convinced I was the world's worst dad and I was really bad at this and I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't have, like, the kid wasn't doing it. Like, anything I felt like I tried didn't work. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be fine.
Everybody
feels that way.
Everybody feels that way. I like emailed a bunch of my friends who are dads, and they are all super great and like, don't worry, everybody goes
imposter syndrome.
You're fine. Yeah. So
it's very statistically, it's very unlikely that you're the worst dad.
Exactly. That helps. You're like, oh, I'm probably about average. Maybe a little above average. I like to flatter myself, but
work for it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Absolutely.
it. So go easy on yourself. It's going to be okay.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Hi to Mike. And let's move on to some follow-up. I got some good follow-up in the last few days since we recorded Monday's episode, since we're recording this a little early. And here it is. First, an anonymous writer wrote in and said, I was listening to Upgrade, and Stephen Hackett posited that adding cameras to the Apple Watch or AirPods would pose a problem for people who work in sensitive areas. I work in the defense industry. Apple Watches and AirPods are already banned from secure spaces, so adding a camera wouldn't change anything. The rules disallow any electronic device with a transmitter, camera, or storage. But I do agree with Stephen's general point about introducing cameras unexpectedly into private spaces. Mm-hmm. See? It's not a problem. Put them in there because they can't use them already. Although I don't know. Aren't defense rules meant to be broken anyway? Oh, topical. Let's move on to.
Yeah, before we start delving too deep into that one, probably.
I mean, what is a rule, really?
I mean, yeah.
Sometimes you just want AirPods.
One of those people has brought a camera into some place they shouldn't have. I guarantee you.
100%. Boyd wrote in and said, in that same episode, Jason suggested that ideally tvOS's primary landing page should be a TV app-centric one. As a non-US Apple TV user, I hope the screen full of app icons remains. Apple does not have a great track record when it comes to integrating non-US or really non-English content. I'm worried it would turn the TV experience into a wasteland for us abroad, because without the local streaming apps and live TV, is that not just the current TV app, but then as the primary interface? No thanks. I got several people wrote in or posted on Blue Sky or Mastodon and said, Jason, you're completely wrong. The all app grid is the way to go. And I appreciate their perspective. A lot of them, the argument was the TV app is bad. And, you know, I guess embedded in my argument that Apple needs to embrace the TV app as the main interface of tvOS is that it wouldn't be the current TV app. It would be an improved TV app with more access to your apps. And yes, they should do a better job with content across the system and floating it up. I think I mentioned that the current TV app is, even on the main screen, is too TV Plus centric, and it needs to be focused on broader content. But if you look at what Google and Amazon do, one of the top rows, maybe on Amazon, it's like right below that ad for Mancini's Sleep World, is a row of apps that are your apps. So the app launcher is in the home screen, and although Apple is, if you scroll down, there are apps in the home screen and the TV app as well. I do think the TV app, if it's going to bear the load of the entire interface, would need to be better. Yeah. I'm not saying that, but I do think that when you use these other interfaces, it's just very clear that it's deeply confusing that Apple has that, but it also has this kind of blank screen, which feels old-fashioned. I did hear from some people who don't use most services and just use third-party apps that they completely control, and they don't want to have this experience either because they don't use their Apple TV that way. I would argue that there's no TV box that really is geared toward that use, and that if Apple went away from that direction, I feel for those people, but I think it would be perfectly reasonable. Yeah. Also, honestly, if Apple wanted to make it that if you really didn't want to use the TV app and you could go back to the launch screen experience, they could maybe make that a setting. But I think the default should be a very functional TV app that actually integrates with third-party apps. That's what I was trying to say.
I would also argue maybe there's another like middle ground there in some ways, which is, wouldn't it be nice if there was like a configurable app, kind of like the TVO app, almost like widgetized, where you could drop in like, well, I watch these apps. Let me just drop in a widget for that here, or a widget for that. And that way you could, I mean, the other alternative obviously is to make it much more of an open API. So those local, apps could integrate in some way, but you'd still need some degree of user choice to allow the user to say, these are the things I want to watch. And I think there's something to that. I think there's something to the idea of making it more customizable.
I would love, I was thinking about this because I watch a bunch of stuff on Plex. I watch a bunch of stuff on YouTube. I would love apps to be able to contribute whole rows to the TV home screen. Again, configurable. So I could maybe put Up Next on Plex if I really cared about it, or Up Next on YouTube in my, or what's on my YouTube TV DVR or whatever it is, and have it be even more that's feeding out of those apps. And that's, again, I think that's one of my complaints about the current TV app is that Apple's not, among the things that Apple's kind of not moving forward with tvOS, better integrating the apps that do want to share data with the system. And that's, I know it's via APIs and all that, but I'm telling you, I think if Apple did an API that allowed Plex to put shows in your face on the home screen, the new home screen, I think, Plex would jump to the challenge, and a lot of apps, maybe not Netflix, right? But a lot of apps would jump to that challenge, and then customizability so it feels more like it's your device. I got a whole wish list. And that's what I want to say to Boyd is I've got a whole wish list about ways the TV app should be better. That I think it is incumbent on Apple to make the TV app better if they go away from the home screen approach. But my larger point is that it's very hard to look at the state of affairs out there and think the right way to do a TV box is a blank screen full of icons, and then you launch individual silos. I think that's just not the way it works or should work.
Literally just over the last week, I was at my parents' house, and my mother asked something about like the Apple TV that I set up for them, and it was like, oh, I can see my photos on here. I'm like, yeah, there is a Photos app on the Apple TV. And I like showed her where it was. And she's like trying to remember which. She's like, oh, it's that orange icon. I was like, no, it's the one that looks like the Photos app on your phone. And she's like, oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And it's like, I understand why you never would have bothered looking for that, though. I mean, it's just a sea of icons. And there was a
Right.
time where that was very accessible and easy when we were all learning how to use our smartphones. But it's been almost 20 years. I think we can expect a little bit more and maybe push the envelope a bit and make things a little friendlier and more customizable. But this is a classic Apple, like, we know best. We're going to provide the one way of doing it kind of situation.
Yeah. Somebody did actually write in. You mentioned widgets. Somebody wrote in and suggested, I wonder if the widget kit framework could be applied somehow to tvOS. And I think it's a great point. Like, could you drop a widget from one of your streaming apps on the home screen somewhere?
I think it'd be great.
Yeah, really interesting idea too.
Yeah.
Linus wrote in and he said, regarding the Snell Talk discussion about how exactly to disclose where you live on the internet. This was Casey writing in after he was already on the show about me talking about living in Mill Valley. Linus says, in Germany, you're legally obliged to state your place of residence in the imprint of your own website, unless you have a company with a different address, I guess. I don't want to judge this one way or the other, but it's a strange feeling at first. And I just wanted to say, I pay a surprising amount of money for a post office box at my local post office, specifically because legally, if you send out mass emails, you must include a mailing address at the bottom of it. And even though, as I said last week, I bought my house in 1999, it's very easy to find where I live. Don't be creepy. I don't want to put my home address on every email I send, so I pay for a PO box at my local post office instead. So I think there are various rules about this where it's like you can't hide on the internet. You have to show where you really are. And if you've got especially a small business, it's like but
I'm
privacy.
Just a guy. I'm just a guy in a house. Yeah, I had the same thing where I don't remember if it was for GDPR compliance or something, but there was a point at which I had to put on my website like my contact info. And I just made like a hidden page on the website, but it's like, and I think I even tried to avoid having it crawled by robots. I don't know how well that worked, but it's technically there just so I could link to it and put it in as the, okay, I've fulfilled your requirements. But it is weird after all these years to feel like, all right, I'm just going to put up my name and my address in plain text on my website. Very weird.
Well, I mean, this is the right thing to do is to go to your local PO or mailbox store.
And I thought about it, but as you pointed out, it's expensive. And I looked at it and I was like, it's just, I don't know if it's worth it for me.
The U.S. Postal Service is it's jacked up that rate like 40% every year.
I was surprised how much, because I investigated this a couple times, like maybe that would be worthwhile. And I was like, that is more than I pay for many of my services.
Honestly, if my business got enough mail,
sure, yeah,
it would be worth it. But the fact is we get so little mail that every like month or so, Lauren says she takes the keychain that's got the key on it. And it's right here. It's right by our Whole Foods. We can walk to the post office. Yeah. But we'll check it. And there's like 2 things in it and they're junk mail and they go in the recycling bin. It's a great ecosystem where the paper comes in, it gets put in a box, people take it out of the box, put it in the recycle bin and then leave the post office. Because you can see all the same inserts from everybody else.
They just get put in everybody's box behind the scene there. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it is and I think Linus's point here is also very interesting because it's meant to protect consumers, but it's also a privacy violation. So they've said like I'm going to tip toward the consumers, but you could argue, especially for certain individuals, that it's also a privacy violation the other way.
It feels like there should be a carve out for if you're a business with fewer than like X employees, or if you have a customer base smaller than Y, maybe you could get an exemption or something. But yeah.
Let's turn to Upstream. I have one Upstream item. Mike is going to be so sad to not be here for an Upstream segment because he likes it so much. But I didn't know where else to put this, so I'm going to put it in a segment that we have. It's an interview with Seth Rogen in Variety about his new Apple TV Plus show, The Studio, which is getting great reviews. I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen either, but it's on my list.
Everybody I've seen seems to really like it and think it's very funny.
I love Hollywood satires. I really do. They're one of my favorite genres.
Yeah, and apparently there's a character in this who is literally the Tim Robbins character from The Player. But it's not played by Tim Robbins. It's played by Bryan Cranston, which is weird. Like, was Tim Robbins not available? He's on another Apple TV
show. That's right.
Anyway, people really like it, and that's great. this is an interesting tidbit. Oh, by the way, this show, the studio, every episode has a oneer, which is the industry talk for a long single take shot that is they're often spectacular, but they're also showing off. And apparently in the studio they put it's meta. They are discussing oneers as well as doing them, sometimes while doing them, apparently, which is hilarious. I feel bad for them because the show Adolescence on Netflix,
they do at the same time. Yeah,
it's 4 episodes and they're all oneers the whole episode. So they kind of stole their.
We were talking about that on the rebound, and Lex talking about how stressful it is when you get to like, okay, you're like 90% done. Don't flub a line now. Like,
yeah,
oh boy,
yeah. There's a before and afters has a thing about the CGI in the VFX in Adolescence. Because, and this is actually kind of brilliant, right? It's messy to do a oneer.
Yeah.
And so they are erasing things that are bad in the background and taking the shadow of the camera off of the chest of somebody who's in the oneer and things like that. And I thought, I'd never really thought about that, but that's really cool. So you keep the concept of the oneer, but you use VFX to clean it up.
Right.
So that you don't have to be as precise as you would otherwise have to be.
Nobody wants to see, oh God, the booms in the shot there. You know, that's really takes me out of this moment. You're making this very immersive, very, a shot designed to make you feel like you are in the thing, in the show, with the, like, it's just real and happening. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can see the guy holding the microphone over there.
Although, tangent, but it's the 20th anniversary of The Office, the American Office, and there was a great oral history about The Office that I will try to find. But they were talking about how they had to hired documentary filmmakers to shoot the show. And they had to explain to them, and the writers had to figure out, like, you can't say, we want you to cut to this or that. They would set the scene, and they would tell the documentary filmmakers and the camera people, they're like, who they hired from making documentaries, like, shoot it like a documentary. And if the boom gets in the shot, it's fine because the boom is in the office. It's a documentary. And that they had to, now it's incredibly common to do that. But at the time, it was not. It was actually really hard. So that is a piece on the Hollywood Reporter. I'll put in the show notes by Rick Porter.
Never watched a full episode of that show, Jason.
It's a great show.
Went to high school with two of those guys. Never watched an episode of that show.
Yeah. It's true. You did. Well, maybe that's why. I don't know. Yeah. Did John Krasinski wrong you in some way?
Only one. No, never.
Anyway,
he was always my minor interactions with him were always very pleasant.
Anyway, Seth Rogen, BJ Novak is the other person you went to high school with. Seth Rogen said to Variety, because of the way we shot it, essentially nothing could be done after the episode. Apple would give us notes, but the answer was always, we can't do that. Can you take out this line? Nope. Can you go from this line to this line? Nope. We can't do any of that because it's a oneer. Brilliant.
It is brilliant.
Genius.
That's great.
Amazing.
I really love that. And also, I also feel like at the same time, you got to have a pretty good relationship with the studio to be able to do that. And especially in this case where you're doing something that is a satire about this industry, like, you need them to realize, like, you know what? We're going to make fun of stuff. It might hit a little close to home for you, but, like, this is the show you hired us to make, right? This is the show you bought.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And they probably said, we're going to have some oneers, so you need to give us notes about that at script stage and not when we shoot it.
Yeah.
Not after we shoot it. And they're like, yeah. And then they give them notes. And they're like, well, it's too late now. But anyway, brilliant move, Seth Rogen. Okay, rumor roundup time.
Yeehaw!
Oh, man, the best yeehaw yet. Well done.
Thank you.
Spoken by a Massachusetts.
Boy. We're a little cowboy out here.
Okay. We're going to start with the iPhone Fold. The folding phone due apparently next year. Apparently this is actually going to happen in 2026.
We're very much in a where there's smoke stage because the rumors about this have started to come much faster. I've seen half a dozen over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, and it's between this and the thin phone, the iPhone Air. Mike and I did a podcast at some point last year where these things were starting to be talked about, where I did one of those connect the dots and I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
They make the thin phone next
Yes, you
year
can.
and they use all of that thinning technology that they're working on for a whole cycle the following year to make the two thin planes of a folding phone. And that seems to be what is happening here.
My understanding is it's just one of those pasta things where you put the phone through and you
And
crank it and it just spits out a nice thin phone.
a very large thin
Very
phone out
thin
the other
phone,
side,
yeah.
and then you throw it in hot water.
And it's
You're done.
Yep.
So the detail here is about the aspect ratio of the unfolded display. Now this comes from a Weibo based account called Digital Chat Station. So sounds super legit, but again, it is a China based source for something that's probably in the supply chain. I actually think that's not unreasonable. That here's what it's going to be. It's going to fold out to a 4:3 aspect ratio screen that is 7.8 inches diagonally. Now, the reason this is interesting is a 4:3, in addition to being the classic television ratio.
Yep, we're back. Everything comes around, Jason.
It's one of my favorite things. Speaking of Star Trek, watching those classic Star Trek episodes on an iPad, it fills the screen because iPads are also 4:3.
Yeah.
So the iPad Mini is 8.3 inches diagonal. So this would be an iPhone that folds open to almost an iPad Mini, including being the right aspect ratio. And as our friend Federico Vitici commented on Mastodon, if this is true, it's kind of ironic. Apple will embrace the iPad's most common criticism. It is just a giant iPhone. But Dan, I got to say, as a big fan of the iPad, and somebody who uses his iPhone, but like not a lot, I love this idea. I really love this idea that I could just have a phone that was an iPad, or in my case, an iPad that was also a phone.
I mean, yeah, I think this is always kind of where I envisioned with them going. I mean, unlike a lot of this is where their advantage is, right? Unlike a lot of the other companies making foldable phones, almost all of those companies, with maybe the exception of Samsung, just make phones, right? They don't generally make tablets, and moreover,
or even if they do, they're not important to their business.
Good, right? Like, because Android is not a great tablet, system. So Apple has a huge advantage here in that they have a successful tablet system and a successful phone system. And if they can make the utility of it is once you get that open into a 4:3 ratio, you can probably run iPad apps just like their iPad apps. I mean, exactly, scaling and whatever, but like it's the same ratio, so it shouldn't matter that much.
It's a huge advantage that Apple has a good. And there's a lot of iPad criticism out there, and there's a lot of issues with Apple's developer relations and all that. But that all said, the iPad is the definitive tablet. It's got a great library of software, even if we have a lot. Again, not saying that it's perfect. I'm just saying that in terms of being a competitive advantage over Android phones, in terms of making an iPhone that opens up and you go into iPad mode, it's a big advantage for them. I think it really is. It can make this product very, very good because they've spent 15 years on the iPad, and they just get to use that when this phone is unfolded. Really interesting.
I saw some criticism there, like, well, all the videos in 16:9, so is it really? What's the point? And it's like, well, to your point, there is a lot of older content in 4:3. There is, I mean, if you're dealing with an iPad, you already have this problem. Like letterboxing is a thing. It's fine. We've been dealing with this for years. So I don't think it's necessarily bad. And I think the idea of having a larger screen that's available to you, because look, I like having a phone with a decent sized screen, but if I could flip that open and have a much larger screen for the cases where I need that, that's pretty compelling to me. So I don't know if it would be good enough to, I don't feel like it would make me get rid of my iPad necessarily, because I use my iPad for a lot of things that I think this may not be suited for, but
sure,
I'm super intrigued by it. And I think there's something here. And plus, this is the first version, so it's going to continue to evolve. I also think one of the points that's been interesting that you've been making elsewhere, and I think people have been talking about, is Apple kind of feels like it's at the top of its hardware game. And the hardware is a big question here, even more so than the software. As we just discussed, the software could just be it's iPad OS on the inside, iOS on the outside. Fine. But the hardware is the question, because this is the issue we've seen with all the foldable phones. They are more fragile. They have creases. The screens can break, right? Like, these are a lot of risks that you're taking here. But Apple does seem to have really high quality hardware engineers, and they are really firing on all cylinders. So I'm sure there will be some shortcoming of this device. There has to be.
Sure.
That's the first version,
but
right?
Doesn't do Face ID. It's going to be Touch ID. It's
Yeah.
going to be the camera's not going to be that great. But
And
we'll
maybe
see.
the screen won't work quite the way they want it to, and maybe there'll be
Sure.
more of a crease than they want. But like, again,
Exactly.
this is starting point, right?
Starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels very much like the point where Apple feels like the screen technology is good enough for an iPhone to have it, whereas I think many of their competitors don't mind being out early with something that doesn't quite work right. Apple tends not to do that and kind of just hangs there for a while, especially with something like the iPhone, which is the crown jewel.
I'm just not sure I'm ready to spend $2,000 on a phone.
I know. I mean, but I will say this: if you're somebody who frequently buys an iPhone and an iPad, it starts to get interesting. Although even then, you could buy a regular iPhone and an iPad Air
Mini,
and have two products. And anyway, it's a place for them to get their revenue up, but also a place to experiment. I'm hoping this is all real. The other rumor item is the iOS 19 interface, which has been chatted about a lot. Front Page Tech has a video showing mock-ups of it. I find it fascinating that one of the things that John Prosser says in his video is that when we last showed you, because remember they did a thing with a mock-up of the camera app and said, see, it kind of looks like the sports app, kind of looks like the invites app. This is what they're doing with their design language. And he says in this video, the camera app was all we were allowed to share at the time, which is fascinating because what that suggests to me is that they got a lot of information from somebody on the inside and they said, you can't leak this all, which is interesting because that's a very weird condition to put on something as a leaker. Obviously, they must have been afraid. Yeah, right? Like it is. It just strikes me. It's like, here's all this information, but you can't print most of it yet. Just wait, and we'll get to it later. And I mean, we've worked with people who've had great sources who haven't been able to print stuff like that. I understand it, but I think it's funny where the control of what gets leaked out of the dump of information is the source's control, but the source gives them everything, but then says, but you can't do all of it yet. It just is weird to me.
Don't worry, Jason. They are clean on OPSEC.
I'm sure it was all on Signal. It's fine. Anyway, this design is more rounded, has translucent glass elements. It's the things we've been thinking about. You can get some suggestions of it from Vision OS, although, again, I will say my feeling is they were working on this design language, and Vision OS got it because they needed to ship Vision OS, and they didn't want to ship it with an old design language that was about to be replaced, so they shipped it with what they were working on and used it as a trial. But I don't think it's like they built Vision OS and everybody said, that's it, let's do that for everything. I don't think that's the case here. I do think that those apps that came out, sports and invites, were influenced heavily by this design language. I do think that that's true. Interesting, like outline floating effect for the keyboard in some of the mock-ups. Yeah, it was. I mean, again, you can watch the Front Page Tech video. It is like essentially if it was a web article, it would have 3 screenshots, but instead there's this long video with jokes and false starts and filler, and it's
not a fan personally.
I don't love him, but I also understand it's the YouTube game. It's a YouTube game.
It's a YouTube game. I'm curious to know just how accurate these are. I mean, obviously, we see some pushback on this, as you.
Yeah, so Mark Gurman weighed in, and he said the iOS 19 images floating around aren't representative of what we'll see at WWDC. They look to be based on either very old builds or vague descriptions missing key features. Expect more from Apple in June. Regardless, mock-ups, real or not, are always exciting for Apple watchers. So he's literally like saying, don't listen to John Prosser, but pats him on the head and says, but it's fun. Everybody's having fun, aren't they? And what I think here is fascinating too, because this either means Mark Gurman knows what it looks like, can't report more about it, and is knocking this down. Or I think more likely, one of Mark Gurman's sources reached out to him and said this is not representative.
Yeah, and I can believe that. I mean, even if it's not inaccurate in the sense that it was correct at some point, Apple always has a vested interest in trying to downplay these kinds of things, right? Because it wants to make a big splash when it unveils this. And so it is, within their interest to be like, no, 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 you think you've seen it all, but that's not really what it looks like. Either that, or Mark Gurman was also given all that information with a condition not to leak. This got one guy's going around telling everybody, oh, here's all the iOS 19 screenshots, but you can't publish them anywhere except for this one and maybe these three. I mean, I'm intrigued in the idea of a big new design overhaul. We talked about this a little bit on Clockwise this week, Micah and I, especially in our post show. There's a lot to be said about this. The iOS 7 design language has lasted a long time, right? I mean, 12 years. It's gotten refined, obviously, over that time. We don't have exactly the same interface that we had when iOS 7 debuted, but it is still fundamentally kind of the same look and feel, broadly speaking. But in that time, we've had a lot of changes. Like Johnny Ive was instrumental in the iOS 7 redesign, and he's not there anymore. So, and not only is he not there, but a lot of the people who worked for him are not there. So the people who are coming up now probably have, maybe this is all they've seen. They've only lived with the iOS 7 one, so they get a chance to really push the envelope and do something different. And I know there's a lot of people who get trepidatious because of the idea of like, hey, well, no, we don't want to change for change's sake, right? Like, well, people get frustrated. The Photos redesign this year is a good example. Like, I know people who still get frustrated with it. I think it's a nice redesign. I think it is thoughtful, but I can understand why people who are especially are very emotionally attached to their photos and are frustrated when they can't find the thing that they used to know how to get to are like, why is this all different? But I think it's one thing that we don't think about enough is sort of the flip side. Like, you shouldn't leave things the way they are just for the sake of leaving things the way they are either. Like, that's the corollary to this is you can't just keep things the same forever because especially in something like technology where the field is moving forward faster and faster and there's different stuff, like you can't just expect that last year's interface or 12 years ago interface is going to accommodate the stuff you're doing now.
Right. I've heard from a lot of people who say I'm worried about this because I don't really like the direction that Apple's interfaces have been going lately. And I totally get that. That is a reason to have trepidation. At the same time, though, I often see these arguments that are like, well, I don't like what Apple has done with this interface, so they shouldn't change it, essentially. So they shouldn't do something new because I don't like what they have now. And that's, I get the fear, but it also doesn't make any sense. Like, I can make the argument. I don't know if they're going to succeed at this. I really don't. Like, I do agree there are lots of reasons to be worried. And the truth is, you mentioned iOS 7. The truth is, every redesign, this happened with a Macworld Web redesign and the Macworld Print redesign that I did and all that, like, every redesign goes too far.
Yeah.
And then spends time reeling it back. But you do end up getting to a new base place that was not possible when you spent a decade just shoving new things into an existing design. That's why designs get old and weird. So my counter argument, my hope, my reason for hope and optimism, I'll say it again, for Mac users is, yes, it's been annoying to have iOS things shoved into macOS over the last decade. But what if that's because they were using iOS design language to shove things into macOS because the iOS design language and the macOS design language never really synced up?
Yeah.
And what if with this, if they did it right, they should be thinking about a design language that can scale across all their devices and what's unique about each of their devices. I'm not saying they will do this, but I'm saying that that's a reason for optimism because I think that Mac stuff will get a better design in a design system that thinks about the Mac. And I'm not sure the stuff they brought to the Mac over the last 10 years from iOS has been anything but stuff that they slap into macOS and it doesn't feel like macOS. So I think there's reason for hope here. I totally get the argument that their track record recently is worrisome and that this may be bad. Also, when it comes out and people have a million criticisms of it, that doesn't mean it's a failure for a few reasons. One is, as I discovered when people complained about the box during the Super Bowl, anything new will be attacked because it's new and people are used to what is there before. And as I said before, every redesign goes too far and needs to get reeled back in. It's the nature of the beast. In fact, a redesign that doesn't go too far is not an effective redesign, I would argue, because it's too timid and you need to try a bunch of stuff. And then you find out over the summer and over the successive years of OS release, you sand off all the rough edges and hopefully get to a good place. That's where this is going to go. But that's not going to stop any of the discourse about this.
No, absolutely not. Because people feel, I mean, again, phones are things that we carry with us every day, and many of us use them constantly. And so it is something you are exposed to much more than, even in many cases, people who sit down at a computer at some point. And so I think people just get emotionally attached. And yeah, I get it. It can be frustrating if you pull out this device that you're so used to having your entire life in, and all of a sudden you're like, everything's different.
That's what happened with
where's my
iOS 7.
stuff? Yeah,
iOS 7
so
convinced a lot of people just to not trust any software updates because
Yep.
it completely
Yep.
changed their.
But
And Apple has
between
changed
that
their
is-
approach since then. But yeah,
But between that and it came on the heels of Apple Maps too, right? Like that was a bad, like 1-2 punch over those 2
Dark
years.
time.
That's rough time.
when people talk about dark time now for Apple with the AI stuff and all that, this came up in MacBreak Weekly last week where it was like, yeah, you remember the butterfly keyboard and all the ports going off the laptops, or yeah, you remember Apple Maps and the iOS 7 redesign. Like Apple has rough patches, and the question is, do they course correct or not? That's the catch, and how quickly do they course correct? Also, good point being made in our member Discord. David Schaub saying, I'm concerned Apple will break the accessibility features I use to mitigate Apple's older wrong choices. And it's like, I get it, but this is one of those things like a movie is announced and people start listing all the reasons it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
And the fact is, any project can be good or bad, and until you see it, you don't know. And so, yes, David is absolutely 100% right to be concerned that Apple is going to blow it and break things and mess everything up and not make accessibility features to allow you to unmess it up. It is a legitimate concern, but I would also argue maybe this is an opportunity for Apple to fix those issues so that it isn't a concern anymore. And until we see how they execute, we don't know.
I'm going to take it even a step further, Jason. Every update, like every movie, can be good and bad. There may be things about it that are good,
true.
and
You're
there may be things about it that are bad. There
Also
probably will be. In fact, odds are.
Unlike a movie, well, I mean, some movies, they do the special edition and the director's cut and all that, but like, unlike most movies, software evolves.
Yeah.
Right. And redesigns evolve. So you throw it out there and then you, I mean, it always happens. We did a Macworld website redesign that was so vastly better than the previous one. And a lot of the feedback was, I can't believe you did this. You've ruined the website because it doesn't do X. And our response to that was not, oh, let's revert to the old website. Our response was, oh, we got X a little bit wrong. Let's fix it. Right. And that's not the same as this whole design is useless.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I mean, we thought this would be something that you would like, and it turns out it doesn't really work, and let's talk about it and let's get more feedback and let's make changes if we need to. And that's just, it's part of the process. So we'll be talking. Dan, I think this is a preview of our summer.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of design change talk, I am sure. I think maybe this will, I mean, people doing the conspiracy theory that this will take the pressure off Apple Intelligence, which I think is certainly not why they did it, but sure, it probably will. We'll have
a nice
new
fringe
thing
benefit, isn't it?
to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a design smoke screen, but it might be a smoke screen regardless.
To paraphrase the old, you won't have Apple Intelligence to kick around anymore.
Yeah. All right. Really quick dive into the Betails.
Woohoo!
Yeah, you got it. You're the right age.
Oh, I love DuckTales. Please,
for the Betails.
I'm right here. I could do the whole.
I'm
song,
doing all.
but
This is
I'm
like
not,
an almost all segment episode. I don't know why. We've got segments. I might as well tag things as being in a segment if we've got a segment to do. macOS 15.4 and iOS 18.4 should be out imminently. Last week they put out a bunch of release candidates, including macOS twice. So something was in there that wasn't quite right. So that should be out this week, maybe even momentarily. Of course, what does it contain? Well, not any of those promised AI features. Zing, boom. Oh, we already have been talking about that for weeks. But Apple Intelligence actually picks up support officially for French, German, Italian, Brazilian, Portuguese, Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, simplified, and English in India and Singapore. So that's nice. The priority inbox features that were strangely only on the iPhone now appear on the Mac and the iPad in this update.
Sure.
The easy device setup with Quick Start, where just like with a phone and an iPad, you can now set up a Mac by holding your old Mac, if it's running this, or your phone near your Mac and having it basically say, yeah, this is who this person is, this is their Apple ID, and get that thing started quickly, which is really nice. Great feature. I remember it was like 8-9 years ago. It was a long time ago where Mike and I did that episode where we complained the whole episode about how Apple's iPhone setup was a disaster, and that your happiest day as an iPhone buyer became a nightmare because you couldn't get things transferred and all of that. And I'm happy to report, I'm not taking credit for it, but I'm happy to report that since we've done that, it really has been on a trajectory where they are so much better at this aspect of device setup than they used to be. So this is bringing it to the Mac. It's
it
great.
Gets better every year. I mean, I honestly think that the transfer, and speaking as someone who gets a new phone every year and has to do that dance every time, I mean, I think that process is vastly improved year over year over year, and I think it's good that they're adding that to the Mac side as well, because you don't do it probably as much as you do with the phone, but it's still, if you've got the benefits, you might as well leverage them.
Yeah, for sure. Also, visual intelligence improvements.
Yeah, it's coming to the iPhone 15 Pro. Will be able to use it in the Pro Max because it relied on the camera control button, which those didn't have, even though those can run Apple Intelligence
on the 16e.
Yeah,
they do, and so now they'll be able to do that on the 15 Pro.
Yeah, either via the action button, and there's also a control in Control Center.
What's the ambient music change?
So there's now ambient music available in the Control Center as well. Apple added these 4 different sound categories: sleep, chill, productivity,
and it just plays music in the background.
It just plays ambient music. So if you're like, I mean, speaking as someone who does put his headphones in sometimes and doesn't put anything on, like I'm at the coffee shop or something, and I'm just like, sometimes I'll have music on, but then I'll pause it and I'll forget to put it on again. Like, I don't know. The idea of just having ambient background noise available, sure, why not?
It's fun. It's a fun idea. And in a really interesting feature that I have not used a lot, but the priority notifications are there on iOS, so you get these notifications that it is analyzing with its ML models and saying this seems important, and so they get floated to the top and they are outlined and they glow. And it's like, this seems to be an important notification for you.
Use this in the beta. It is mixed, as you might expect from these types of features. Sometimes it works fine, but just this morning I definitely got one that was for one of those you haven't paid your toll, your car toll scams. So it's like, okay, well, that's not important, so never mind.
Oh well.
And then there's one other thing I noticed actually as I was scrolling through. I forgot. This is was in the beta when 18.4 came out. Is the Apple News food section will be available to Apple subscribers, so recipes and all that stuff, which I think is interesting. It does feel a little bit like, with its integration with sports stuff and then the puzzles that it's added. In some ways, I think Apple is trying to recreate the newspaper a bit more in its Apple News thing, which I think is clever.
It's a content bundle. I wonder sometimes. The food thing is the thing that made me wonder about it, but I also now am thinking about the puzzles and stuff too. Is I appreciate the all-in-one approach, which is like it's all-in Apple News app for News Plus subscribers. They're trying to create a content bundle.
Yep.
I do wonder if, and this is going to make anybody who uses like a third-party app wince, but like I do wonder if they should maybe just make a recipes app that contains all that content.
Maybe.
And maybe a
games app. Oh, Lex, cover your ears.
Apple.games. I don't know. It's because I mean the challenge is that some people use news all the time. Other people don't even think about it. And so the argument is this will get people to use the news app. Yeah. And then once we got them, the counter argument is people who don't go in the news app because they don't find it valuable are never going to find this content, even if they might like to do the crossword puzzle, even if they might like to look up recipes. Like I think about this and I'm like, oh,
yeah. I mean, the Times does this with its setup, right? There's the New York Times app is news, but then it has a cooking app and then it has a puzzles app, and they're separate.
It does.
You can subscribe to them separately in some cases too.
Indeed. So I do wonder. I'm not saying that Apple should make a full-fledged recipes app that you could add your recipes to, although they might do that, but it would be interesting if they could put their News Plus. What I'd really like, this will not happen, but wouldn't it be nice if Apple thought this way, is Apple's put a bunch of recipes in News Plus. What if Apple offered a recipes API that allowed recipe apps to include Apple News Plus recipes in their search?
That'd be interesting. So
third-party recipes
or paprika or whatever could pull from that.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering briefly if there was a thing in the alternative too, where it could like pull stuff from your recipe apps into Apple News Plus, or pull games that you want to play. And I was like, I don't know if that's a good solution or not, but it would be cool if there was integrations with like, hey, you like these games in Apple News Plus? Why don't you try out Lex's games or the New York Times games or what have
Sure.
you?
Yeah, that'd be interesting too. All right, this episode of Upgrade is brought to you by Ecamm. Ecamm Live is the leading video production and live streaming studio built for the Mac. And it doesn't stop there, because Ecamm is great at simplifying your workflow too. You can do it all with the Ecamm app. Get started quickly and have everything on hand to create whatever you need with video. I am an Ecamm Live subscriber. I love it. The reason I love it is because, first and foremost, it's a Mac app. It's made for the Mac. If you've used other video streaming apps, they are great. They're often free. They're open source. They feel like open source apps. Sometimes they feel a little bit janky. Their interfaces are weird. Sometimes they're slow. Ecamm Live is none of those things, because it's built for the Mac on Mac frameworks. Everything in it is super Mac-like. I use it for all our 6 Colors live streams, for all of the Total Party Kill live streams that I stream. What I love about it most these days is its integration with Zoom, because we use Zoom for our podcasting. So I can pop with the Zoom integration. Okay, I got to step back. I used to capture the Zoom screen and then carve it up into little squares and put those squares in places for the people who are on the podcast. With the Zoom integration, I just make boxes where the people should go and assign the people to boxes, and it just happens automatically from session to session. It makes it so much easier. The quality is really great. It lets me stream at a very high quality, because the individual people are coming in at 720p, but they're actually scaled down and a little bit smaller, so they're actually of higher quality. It's really great. Easy to set up my YouTube streams, so that I can press a couple of buttons in the interface, add a new stream, schedule it for the future, press a button and go live. Press a button and we're done. It auto records in the background, so it generates a super high quality file on my disk. It's got a great set of canvases, so you can do different layouts. You can set up. So I have Total Party Kill layout with everybody's faces in little boxes, but I've got a different one where the faces are in different shaped boxes, and there's a map that's a screen capture. They have a new version that just added some great new screen capture features that allow the screen capture aspect ratio to be more dynamically controlled. Like it's all there. It's all full speed. It's fast. It's responsive, and it works the way a Mac app should work. So it's great for streaming, recording, podcasting, and presenting. If you want to stand out from the crowd, you need high quality video. You can screen share. You can use multiple cameras. I bought a second Insta360 webcam because Ecamm Live will let me use it as a second input, including giving me complete pan, tilt, zoom control over it inside Ecamm Live without even using the Insta360 app. And I direct these shows in real time. I use their Stream Deck plugin to do switching and toggling on and off using my Stream Deck. You can add in logos, titles, lower thirds, graphics, drop in video clips, bring on interview guests, use a green screen. I use my green screen with it when I'm doing the D&D stuff. You can bring in comments from YouTube or elsewhere and put them on the screen and react to them, which we do with the 6 Colors live streams that we do. It does it all. Ecamm's members are entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, podcasters, educators, musicians, church leaders, bloggers, and content creators of all kinds. If you're on the pro level plan like I am, you get Ecamm for Zoom, automatically send Ecamm Live's audio and video outputs into a Zoom meeting. How about that? So that you can actually produce your output and send it to a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar or event. You can add up to 8 Zoom participants as cameras in your broadcast or recording, automatically create individual participant audio and video recordings for later that are separate. Really good. You can get 1 month free today. Go to ecamm.com/upgradefm and use the code UpgradeFM. That's a whole month free of Ecamm Live. ecamm.com/UpgradeFM and code UpgradeFM. Go there now. Check it out. We like those people over at Ecamm. Thank you for supporting Upgrade. Dan, WWDC 2025.
It's here. It's now. I got to go.
Surprised they're doing it.
Right now. No, not right now.
Not a surprise that they're doing it.
Shocked.
Not a surprise the way they're doing it. not a surprise that it's the week of June 9th, but at least now we know and can therefore make our hotel reservations.
The most important of all, make your travel plans. Yeah, nothing, as you said, nothing surprising about this from the format, which sounds like it's going to be exactly what we've seen the last several years. I
Yep.
mean, we've talked a lot about this. I know you've talked a lot about this. There's no reason for them to change. This is kind of a piece with their, like, when you're on top, why change, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's working for them.
Works for them.
Yeah, like, would there be elements of doing a live show that could have advantages? Sure. Would those advantages outweigh them being able to do a heavily produced, pre-recorded video? Not necessarily.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. It gives them complete control.
I wonder about some of the ancillary stuff. Like last year, for example, we got that post-keynote session where Justine interviewed John
Executives.
Andrea, yeah, and Tim and everybody, and like I again, a lot of that felt like damage control, right? Like, we're behind on AI, and we need to talk about it. So let's promote our what we're doing. I don't know that I expect them to repeat that this year. I think this will look more like the pre ones where it's like, okay, it's a recorded thing, then there's a State of the Union, and then
I mean, they may experiment. The Apple PR has shown, like, if they have a new thing, like if they do the big redesign, I could see them doing a post keynote press availability at the Steve Jobs Theater with the design team talking about the new design. And the idea there is that it's a controlled environment that allows the press to write more about their, what they want to say about why they did the design the way they did. I could see it, but it would really take that where they feel that that's necessary. And I could also see them say, no, it's not necessary. We'll do an exclusive with Wired or something, and we'll put it there, or the Wall Street Journal, or whatever it is. We'll do some exclusive interviews, and we'll have somebody go on the talk show, and that'll be that. But it's going to be the same game plan. We also got a lot of briefings. Like, there was an Xcode briefing, and there was a private cloud compute briefing, and more than they've done in the past. And again, it depends on what they want to explain to the press.
It's controlled narrative, right? It's not only what they want to talk about, it's what they don't want to talk about, right? So if you're like, if they're promoting something where it's like, here, we're going to talk about the new redesign or whatever, it's because they may not want to talk about Apple Intelligence, for example, this year. And so if they can, again, if they can shunt you into talking about, these are the topics we're really excited to talk about, and those other things, that's fine, we'll answer your questions. We're not as excited to talk about those. So let's focus on this stuff.
It's a press event, and it's also a PR event because they'll invite developers there. And I mean, that's going to be an interesting dynamic because there's a lot of uncertainty right now about U.S.-based events. The fact is there are a lot of people who are going to be reluctant to travel to the U.S. given what's going on with immigration enforcement. Fortunately, most of the event is online, but the group of developers who gets invited is incredibly small. But I have also heard from a lot of people in our community who don't come as an invited developer, but come because this is the one event all year where all the people in the community, high-profile developers and media people and people we know at Apple are all in the same place. And that will also get hit by this, where there are people we know who feel like they aren't comfortable coming through U.S. immigration for various reasons, and I think that will be the case where this is everybody gets together. I suspect that it will not be as much as it's been in the past for those reasons.
It does feel, between that and also some of the flack Apple has taken for its political and other stances or lack thereof, there is a feeling, I think a slightly more subdued feeling around it this year. So there's a lot of challenges. But
that said, however many developers they invite, they will get a bunch of gleeful developers who will cheer, that will be in the seats at Apple Park, and they will go ahead with it. But that is a thing that's kind of hanging over it, and we'll see.
It's not going to be the audience of a last place baseball team on a cold day, right? It's not going to be like, all those open seats, right? They'll fill all the seats.
What's going to happen though is that we're gonna be at a dinner or at a restaurant somewhere and be like, or even at the event and say, well, where is so and so, and the answer is going to be, well, they didn't come.
Yeah.
And in fact, what I would love, this is a thing that they haven't announced, but I would love if they would consider doing this, and they might do this. It's possible. Is to offer some alternate venues. I know they did that in London last year, where they did an event at Battersea.
Yep.
So it's possible that there could be some other things, but it's not going to be the same because it's not going to be the one
Everyone
place that
together.
everybody
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I do
That's
think
not
that
going to
would be
happen.
smart. And they've done a lot of their little like tech talks and stuff, right, in various places. They have a lot of
Sure.
offices around the world. They have retail stores around the world. Like I've always thought, like if you're going to call it the Worldwide Developers Conference, like I don't know, embrace that first part a little bit more. Realize that you have lots of people. Yeah, granted, it's
Yeah.
great that everybody's online, but if you can also sort of have opportunities for people to gather locally to like, hey, we're going to watch the
Sure.
keynote at the Apple Store, or we're going to
Right.
invite several developers who live in this country to come to the campus in, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
Bangalore or something like, that's great. You should do
Yeah.
that. You should take
Yeah.
advantage of the fact that you're a global company.
So you and I both spent our most recent Macworld columns talking about what this event is going to be and what they're going to do. I argued in mine this week that I think this is the most intriguing WWDC maybe ever since I've been covering it. And
Mm-hmm.
the early days of OS 10, there was a lot of interest in like what they were doing, but here it's not really about what they're doing as much as like what is the strategy and how did
Yeah.
they communicate it, because they created the Apple Intelligence brand. That was kind of the goal of last June, and they did do that. So maybe they back off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
My theory in my Macworld column was that they enter a cleanup and consolidation phase, right? It was a big mess last
Yep.
year. Maybe this year they can afford to say we're improving our models. Here's a few details. Here's some changes that we're making to how it's implemented that make it nicer. We'll ship the stuff that we promised that we didn't ship the last time. Maybe there's a few new features. Wouldn't it be nice if part of the story was developer focused this time? Because as we noted last June, but I just want to put it out there again, most of what they announced last June at the Worldwide Developer Conference was not things that developers could do anything with.
Right.
Like the most developer integration is like you could make a button to do image playgrounds, or you could use the writing tools in your app, but there wasn't like access to Apple's models or anything like that. And I understand it on one level, which is that it was brand new and it was rushed to market. But another level, it as a platform play, and Ben Thompson wrote about this on Stratechery a couple weeks ago. Handing a lot of these tools to developers could actually make your platform much stronger. So I do wonder if they will have a developer story that's more fully featured this time. That would be nice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously the big thing that everybody was kind of looking to for the developer story was App Intents, right? Like that is a place where there was integration. It's like the pretty much the only place that developers could have their apps touch Apple Intelligence at all. And of course, that's now been delayed. So there's a question as to whether or not that will be something they want to talk about this year.
Right.
Like, yeah, is that still happening?
Well, do they put that in the beta, right? I mean, they might
That's a big
say,
question.
guess
Yeah.
what? We are shipping that, and here it's in the developer betas, and you've got all summer to help us make this stuff better. Let's get going. And
Right.
in fact, I would argue that change is so huge that giving developers lots of runway instead of dropping it on a 0.4 would be really good. Like that would be a
Yeah.
much.
Es-
And if that's the
Especially if you've
case, I do
taken it a
wonder
step
if
further, like if you're doing more with it.
yeah, if that's the case, I do wonder if that's actually one of the reasons they delayed those features. Is they're like, there's so much here. Let's get the long rollout starting at WWDC instead of dropping this in a point release with a very narrow beta cycle. Maybe. I don't know. I also, so maybe I want to see what they learned, right?
Yeah. Well,
I want to see what they learned
did
from
they
last
learn
year,
anything? Have they
right?
learned their
Because
lessons?
that's the question. Did they learn things about AI that they can say, oh, yeah, we've realized that this is the right thing to do? Or did they not? And then did they learn about overpromising and underdelivering?
Yeah.
Because they just put a bunch of new executives in charge of Siri. And I know there's a lot of pressure to ship something that's better Siri and ship it sooner rather than later. And I agree. I want to see new Siri sooner rather than later. My fear is that they could get tricked into overpromising and underdelivering for Siri like they did with
Yeah.
Apple Intelligence, right?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of questions about how they're going to respond to what they did last year, right? Like this was kind of the thrust of my article is like, you've got a couple different options into how you handle this, right? First option is to cop to it. Be like, you know what? We announced these really exciting features last year. We realized they were going to take a little more time than we needed, but we're excited to announce they're coming in iOS 19. And maybe even here's some tweaks we've made or things that like more details, etc. That's one option. Option two is to just not talk about it, which sounds ridiculous, but I can easily imagine a world where Apple maybe like says like, yep, and we've got Apple Intelligence. Moving on. Let's talk about iOS 19
Yeah.
redesign.
Oh yeah. Right.
Like,
yeah. What do they do? What do they
we'll
say?
all look at each other and they'll just keep going, right?
Yeah,
they just don't want to talk about
it. Feels like they might want to apologize here, or at least do a apologetic statement of some sort, right? Maybe not a full-on apology, but just an acknowledgement.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe not. And then the other question is, like you said, is this just a consolidate and clean up, or is this them saying, look, AI is still big. We're going hard on it. And here's our next generation of Apple Intelligence features, or here's what we're doing to improve the stuff we put out last year. And especially in the case of the former, if you're talking about new features that you're adding under this umbrella of Apple Intelligence, how do you deal with the fact that you didn't ship everything that you promised the first time? Because on the one hand, it's like, well, what, like, can you build on it? Like, technologically speaking, like, it's not like you can take something like App Intense or, personalized Siri and soup it up when you never shipped it in the first place. And then the other side of that, as you and I discussed elsewhere recently, is like, realize that you're talking, as we said, to a press event. You're talking to developers and you're talking to press. Both of these people are going to be a heck of a lot more skeptical about anything in this area. A lot, right? Because you did not ship it. And in the past, you have a lot of credibility built up where we all, kind of accepted that if you talked about a thing, like, okay, some stuff might ship in the fall, some stuff might ship in the spring. That had started slipping more and more lately. But it would get shipped in that version, especially with something that is that big a deal that you spent that much time on. But instead, what we got to is a point of realizing maybe not only are you not going to ship that, but it didn't work when you had it, right? Like it was never a thing. Nobody saw it. Nobody saw it demoed. So a lot of press are going to be a lot like harder on like big claims that Apple makes. They're going to ask to see demos. They're going to ask to see like, okay, does that work? Can you show that to me? Can I try it? Like, what state is this in? So I think you have to realize if you're Apple going into this that you are going to be subjected to a lot more scrutiny than in the past. And you have to be prepared to deal with that because you're going to get a lot of questions out of it. And Apple PR, they're very good at what they do. They're very good at talking about the things they want to talk about and not talking about the things they don't want to talk about. But I think a lot of those of us who are there are going to be asking a lot of questions. And more to the point, we are going to be noting when they talk about things and don't want to show them to us. So you got to be very careful about how you're doing that. And that's the lesson I want to see if they learned this time.
Yeah, they made it harder on themselves, and I think
they really.
I think they are aware of that. If I'm certain about anything, it's that one that I think they know because of what happened last time that they need to be more specific about time frames if they can be. Also, more warning flags about this is going to ship next year, which they did some. I mean, I will say that like John Gruber was on here a few weeks ago and he said he felt bamboozled by WWDC announcements because they didn't ship them. And I dug up my piece from afterward. And one of the things that I pointed out is the Siri section of that keynote is aggressively in the future tense.
Yeah.
So much of what they do is like, look at this. Image Playgrounds does this. Image Playgrounds does this. Genmoji does this. And then they're like, let's talk about what Siri will be able to do. Siri will be able to do this. And it's all suddenly we're like, in the future, we will do Siri, as opposed to it does it now.
I don't know.
Like that was
2030, 2037.
Big red flag. Big red flag right there. So
I can say a lot of things I'll do in the future, Jason. I can talk about a lot of things
stuff in the future.
I'm going to be in great shape. I'm going to go. I'm going to run a 4-minute mile. I will run a 4-minute mile someday.
You could if you put your mind to it. It's all possible.
Yeah.
So how they frame it, what they show, how they choose to show it, I'm sure goes into they're going to have conversations about it based on last year. But that's again, that comes back to my thing that I find most fascinating is. Last year was an aberration. Last year really was Apple kind of panicked, rushing, and behaving very un-Apple-like in some ways because they felt like they had to get the stuff out. It's been a year. Do they feel less panicked? I would argue yes, at least in some areas, maybe not so much in others. I mean, I really would argue that I don't think Apple feels the abject panic, existential panic of being completely flat-footed on AI. They've had, a year plus to be on this path now. And I still believe that if you look at what's out there with AI, catching up is not going to be hard because it seems. And I was listening to a podcast the other day where they're like, they're so far behind and they're still behind. It's going to take them forever to catch up. It's like, I don't know. I look out at AI and it feels like everybody is just continuing to advance the ball. And that DeepSeek suggested that it's really easy to just kind of like do a fast follow of the people who are out there and that there's not much of a moat. And if that's true, then Apple doesn't have a lot to worry about. They need to press forward. They are still behind, but it gives me more confidence that they can be good enough and catch up. So I feel like the panic is not quite as strong, although the Siri panic may be real. The features they didn't ship may be real. But so what do they learn? And how is their demeanor different? And how does that impact how they communicate this stuff? Is it less panicky than last time? Is it not panicky?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think, Apple, say what you will for Apple. I think they work hard to try and cultivate, obviously, a demeanor of being very calm and rational, right? Like they don't like to look like they're sweating. It's not in their in their image. So everything you're going to see out of them is going to feel very. I think they'll project an image of being very much on top of things and very decisive.
Effortless.
And this is how things are doing. That we're very excited about this, all of this. But yeah, our job as people who have watched this company for a long time is to read between the lines and see why are they doing these things and what does that tell us about what they learned or did not learn from last year.
I think in the post keynote episode that Mike and I did last year, I said they feel very much like the proverbial duck, where they really want to be completely serene above the waterline. But in this case, everybody knows they are paddling furiously below the waterline because they just don't want to be seen as breaking a sweat. And you could argue that that's why those features went in there and that people feel like they blew it, is because if they're going to announce a feature, they're going to do so with confidence. So much confidence, in fact, that then their marketing team put out ads showing the feature in action. And, that's why I think maybe the greatest failure in that whole process was a failure to communicate properly how hard it was going to be to implement those features, when lots of us sat there and thought, that's a heavy lift. That's going to take them a lot of time. Right. That's clearly a next spring kind of thing, because that's a big, big, hard feature to implement.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, but we're never gonna let them see us sweat.
What I'm hearing, Jason, is you're saying what we have here is a failure to communicate.
I'm just saying, be a duck.
Be a duck. That's right.
Be a duck, or don't be a duck.
Be a goldfish.
Be a goldfish. Thank you. We're going to go to Ask Upgrade in a moment. I just wanted to mention, if you love Upgrade and want to get more of it, please consider subscribing to Upgrade Plus. Longer ad-free episodes every week, access to the Relay members Discord, tons of bonus content, including 2 members-only Relay shows and more bonus content. You support Mike and his new baby by signing up for Upgrade Plus. People at Memberful tell us we have incredibly low churn, which basically means our members want to stay subscribed once they've signed up. That's a good sign. So please consider Upgrade Plus. And now we move on. It's time for Ask Upgrade. I expected nothing less from the author of the Galactic Cold War series.
Full of lasers. I'm just full of lasers.
You are a laser machine. The first question comes from Rio, who asks, what do you do when you fall behind on your podcast listening? I'm on a busy family vacation combined with additional hockey episodes. I fell behind close to 100 hours on my podcast. So far, I've bumped speed to 2x on some episodes and not listening to time irrelevant episodes. What do you think? What do you do when you're behind on podcasts?
I have the dirty secret of a podcaster, Jason. I don't listen to that many podcasts.
I mean, how could you? You work at home.
And I make podcasts. I'm usually podcasting or writing. I have limited time to listen to podcasts. I do try to catch up on the few shows that I listen to regularly, of which I should say Upgrade is one. Um, I don't always. I think I triage some stuff, right? Like there's times where I'll be like, I've got a big backlog. Usually, if I have a backlog, it's because I was traveling. And a
Yeah.
lot of times, if I really have a backlog, it's because I was traveling and I want to listen to the shows that I am normally on, but I was not on, like my shows. So it's like, oh, I was not in the rebound this week, so let me listen to John and Lex and what they talked about, or I wasn't on Clockwise, let me listen to what Micah did in my absence, so I can
Right.
know kind of have continuity or what have you.
Sure.
A lot of times I have the benefit there of like I've traveled, so maybe I'm on a plane or something, and I have some time, or I'm at the airport and I need to kill
Hmm.
some time listening to a podcast, so that's fine. But I, in the past when I have, listened to more podcasts more consistently, I just declare bankruptcy. I think that's what it is. Like
Yep.
I just
That's the
can't
answer.
if it's news stuff especially,
Oh
like
yeah.
if it's timely, no,
Gone.
I'm not going to listen to that.
No,
If it's
declare bankruptcy is
yeah,
the answer. If
if
you can't get to it.
if it's narrative or whatever, it's like okay,
Oh sure.
I will spool it out. But no, new
Yeah.
stuff, don't worry about it.
I have podcasts where I'm largely not on the current. I'm just going through the archive. Rest is history is kind of like that for me. And
Good
that's
news,
easy
not
because
timely.
I can just hold
History.
those there. It's history.
All that's
Exactly.
happened. It's fine.
But I mean, I was in Hawaii and I had a huge backlog, and I just recently I deleted a bunch of like 2 ATPs and a couple of connecteds, and like I just yes, this is the truth. Is bankruptcy is a thing. If you are behind, first off, the timely stuff, listen to the timely episodes. Don't listen to the past episodes. You can go back to the past episodes if you need to. If there are segments in the past episodes that sound interesting, maybe you jump to
Carve those out.
those and listen to those and then delete those episodes. But you can't be a completist in these scenarios, because I absolutely have dealt with the same thing, especially on vacations. And I think the answer is it's okay if let's say, I know you're going to feel like you missed out, but like if you went on vacation and came back and you had that really long John Gruber episode of Upgrade and the really long John Syracuse episode of Upgrade, and then you're looking at Stephen Hackett and Dan Moren, you're like, oh boy, well, maybe you don't listen to the Gruber and Syracuse episodes, or maybe you look at the chapter markers and say, well, I really want to hear the Upgrade Plus segment where Jason and John talked about James Bond for 40 minutes, or maybe the reverse, and you say, definitely not that.
Skip that.
Whatever it
Yeah.
is, take control of your life, and it's okay to skip. And if you know what, if it becomes a part of podcast lore, it's still there. You go back and listen, download it again, and listen to it again, and that's
Think
fine too.
about it this way. You were on vacation having amazing experiences. Those podcast hosts didn't get to have those
No.
experiences. They missed out on you.
I was watching on YouTube. I was watching a segment of Conan O'Brien's podcast where he was talking about hosting the Oscars. It was really interesting. The whole time I'm watching it, though, I'm thinking, meanwhile, while the Oscars were going on, I was literally sitting on a beach in Hawaii.
Yeah,
And
you
it's just
win.
like,
You win.
I win. Conan
Yeah.
O'Brien loses. I win. I was sitting on a beach in Hawaii.
He had to
I win
host
that
the
one.
Oscars.
He had to host the Oscars.
That's
Exactly.
nobody wants that job.
Nobody wants. He's coming back.
He's doing
so
it again.
he
I
wants it,
know. He's
apparently.
good for him. Good for him.
All right, Logan wrote in and said, seeing as Apple is rumored to be running behind, do you think the company will purchase their way to a better Siri? If so, what would they pick? Maybe Perplexity or Anthropic? I mean, they could. The problem is the AI companies tend to have really overflated valuations. And like I said, I feel like one of the lessons of DeepSeek is maybe there's not much of a moat here. And then unless you really want the people and an influx of people, and the risk there is they're not going to want to come work for Apple. And, Acquihire I could maybe see, or if something really ends up in trouble. But I think not. I think you need to state your commitment to AI and keep hiring people to do the job and catch up, because I don't get the sense that what Google does can't be replicated by Perplexity. What Anthropic does can't be replicated by OpenAI, and vice versa. I just don't get that sense. If that becomes true, then they're going to have to buy somebody, but I just don't think it's true.
Yeah, I think if you look at Apple's history, it's far more likely that if they want to purchase something, they'd purchase a small company doing something with AI that's specific to something they want to do. I mean, they've done this a bunch with mapping and different kinds of software over the years. It's very rare for them to do a really big purchase. I mean, we talk about this. Beats, right, is still, I think, the biggest purchase, 3.2 million, or was it Next? I don't remember. Either way, it's very rare. We're talking decades between acquisitions that large. And I don't think, as Jason said, there's not enough for them to get in terms of secret sauce that makes it worthwhile for them to go out and spend however many hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, it's going to cost them to buy a company that is that big and that prominent.
Yeah.
And they have talent. I mean, you look at the stuff they've done, look at their machine learning blog, like they have people doing this.
Oh, yeah.
I don't
They do.
think that the AI is necessarily the problem. I think the
I
bigger
don't think so.
question is, what are you going to do with it? And that's
Yeah.
the part where the rubber meets the road, and you got to figure that out. And that's, not a problem that you can necessarily just throw people at.
I agree. Anthony writes, Jason has spoken before that he primarily uses his Mac at home and doesn't use his phone as much unless he's away from the house. With the new iPhone mirroring, does he ever pick up his phone at home anymore? First off, I actually probably use my iPad as much as I use my Mac at home because I use my Mac for work, and everything else I use my iPad at home. My Mac is a laptop now. I still generally don't leave it anywhere but docked. It's a very rare day that the MacBook Pro comes out into another place in my house. I did work on it in the backyard the other day where we had a really beautiful day. We had like an 80-degree day. Sunny, warm, sat in the backyard for the first time this year. That was really sweet. And I used my laptop because I got that now. I bring my whole computer with me out there. It works pretty well. So that's the case. But I don't use my iPhone as much. Although I will say, Anthony, I use my iPhone more than I used to, in part because I have so many devices now that have iPhone apps to control them. And even if I could put them on my iPad or even on my Mac, there's this whole issue of like, is the iPad authenticated? So I use that more than I used to. iPhone mirroring, here's the truth. I don't use iPhone mirroring as much as I would like to for two reasons. The first is my iPhone lives in a charger in standby mode, and the charger is in my kitchen. It's coming out of my kitchen. There's a counter that runs sort of to the hallway door, and that's where it is. It is the two places that I work are in my garage and in the back bedroom, neither of which is within range of that to do iPhone mirroring. So that's not great. It means I have to pick up the iPhone and mindfully bring it with me, at which point I kind of can just open the iPhone. And my other problem with the iPhone mirroring is authentication. And I don't know, I'm sure Apple is doing things properly from a security standpoint, but let's be honest here. Every time I use the iPhone mirroring, one of two things happens. Either it says, you need to go open your iPhone and put in your password for me to use this feature, which is so frustrating. It's like, I'm right here. Or the other thing that sometimes happens is I've got my iPhone open and I think, you know what, I can just do this on the Mac. And then I click iPhone mirroring. It says, I'm sorry, iPhone mirroring won't work because your iPhone is being used. and then, you know what I do? Then I lock it so that I can do that. And it says, now you need to authenticate on your iPhone because it's locked. What is happening?
Yeah, there is definitely I don't know if this is intentional or not, but I think it reset the permissions every time there was a software update, and we're in the beta phase now, so I'm frequently updating the software on my iPhone every couple of weeks, and so I think every time I did that, it's like, oh, you got to reauthenticate, and it's so few and far between that I forget. And I did notice the other day I used it, and it did not prompt me, and I was like, oh, did I enter the password? Or maybe they fixed that. So I'm not sure. Maybe they'll make some changes about that. But I agree. The barrier to entry on it is just high enough that a lot of times it's like, look, I've got Face ID. I can literally just pick this up, open it, and I'll be doing the thing I want to be doing.
I might as well just
I like
open it up.
It's a cool feature, and I like
it's a cool feature
for specific tasks that I want to do where it's like, what would be great? Having a keyboard that I can use with my iPhone right now, or accessing this app that I like only can get on my phone.
So this is one of my, maybe I'll put this on my macOS wish list. In addition to having the lock behavior be better, what I would really like is I would like to be able to add iPhone apps like I can add web apps.
Mm-hmm.
So they go in the dock or they go in users, my user folder applications, so that I could just have a shortcut that opens iPhone mirroring and opens that app so it feels like that app is running. But I don't think that feature exists. I think it's just like all or nothing. And I would love that
because do it. I mean, because you can launch from notifications. So if you can do that, it feels like you could have a shortcut to open.
Feels
an app.
Like, right?
Yeah.
And you could do widgets on your desktop. So anyway, exactly. I also I know why they're doing it because they're using continuity, but like if my iPhone is in my house on my Wi-Fi and I want to view it, I should just be able to view it. I should not have to, even if it's a setting I have to set, like saying if you're on my home Wi-Fi, just let me do it. Because that's the thing that really kills me is I have this great iPhone mirroring feature, but it doesn't matter. I have to get up and walk down the hallway and get the iPhone and then do the thing I wanted to do without getting up and walking down the hallway and getting the iPhone. So I hope they make it better. It's a cool feature, but I don't use it. The answer to Anthony is I actually don't use my iPhone as much with mirroring because of all the roadblocks. So I hope it gets better, is all I can say.
Yeah, I agree.
Darren wrote in and he says, do you listen to any podcasts where you can't tell the hosts apart? I don't have that issue with Upgrade, but on Jason's recommendation, I started listening to The Rest is History, and for the life of me, I can't separate the identities of the two hosts. I used to have the same problem with Reply All as well. Does this ever happen to you? And if so, any tips on how to fix it? Now, I'm fascinated by this because I can tell Tom and Dominic apart easily, but I think some of it is you have to have an ear for it. I was always really good. I have always been really good at hearing voices, even of like voiceover artists, and being able to pick out who it is. So some of it is just how our brains process information. I'd say for me, it's time is the other thing. It's just the more time you spend. Also, if that podcast has a video, Rest is History has a YouTube channel. They post clips and they sometimes post extended segments. You watch that a little bit, and then you'll get pictures of them in your mind, and you'll see who's speaking, and that might help your brain kind of lock on to who is who. I would like to ask now my co-host John Syracusa what he thinks. Oh, I mean Dan Moren. Lots of people can't tell you guys apart, which I don't understand, but apparently it's a thing.
We're clearly very different, Jason.
Oh, what?
I don't get it either.
It's not a robot.
People tell me that too, and I don't get it because I don't hear. John, to my mind, has a very distinctive voice, and
he does.
I do not confuse him with anybody.
No.
I don't really. Yeah, I do get that a lot though. I don't have this problem either. I think like you, I just have a brain that's wired for it. And again, I don't listen to so many podcasts. I'm trying to think like,
there's my other piece of advice, in addition to give it time and maybe watch videos to kind of maybe trick your brain into learning who these people are. You're not going to like it, people, but I'm going to put it out there. Maybe for that podcast, slow it down.
I was going to say,
maybe they sound very different at 1x, and it's because you're listening at 2x that you can't differentiate between them.
Now, I wouldn't advocate going to 0.5.
No.
unless you enjoy podcasts where people sound drunk. I have occasionally done it by accident. And it's very funny for about the 2 seconds I let it stay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree.
But I mean, slow it down to 1 is what I'm saying.
Yep.
Or just slow it down a notch or 2. Until you can pick it up, and then maybe you can crank it back up. But that would be another suggestion. I think there are ways to trick your brain to do this, or to educate your brain, and then it starts to map everything, and then it will start to work. That's my guess.
Yeah.
I know it's hard.
Brains are weird.
Brains are weird. Anyway, thanks, John. I mean, Dan, sorry, I got you confused again.
Jason, I'm done with this show.
It happened a lot in the beginning with the Incomparable. I was like, I never, ever in a million years would have guessed.
Weird. You know, the funny thing is, as I joke, John lives like 5 minutes from the house where I grew up. He lives in the same town where I grew up. He was very close to my parents. But he grew up in New York, so it's not like our accents are
he's got a very different. I read a whole piece today about the California accent, which was really funny. Because the whole idea is Californians say they don't have an accent, but they do have an accent. Great story, very fun. And they said that the one thing that everybody already knew about people in the West is that the COT merger, where the COT and CAUGHT in California are identical, whereas in the East you get a lot of people who say COT and COT. It is my in-laws are both from Queens, so I have lots of New Yorkisms.
That's very strong.
Every now and then, I just like to rip out a Florida because it's fun.
I do highly recommend, by the way. It's several years old now, but the old New York Times quiz where it would ask you, it would try to nail down where your dialect is from.
Oh yeah.
That thing was incredible. It was so good.
This piece points out that it's two things, right? It's your word use and it's your it's your vowels and things like that. Exactly, and that they can move at different rates, and that usually word use is fast, and that the phonetics are slow. But in the case of California, that's actually not the case. So really interesting. And yeah, that New York Times thing said you're probably from Modesto for me, and it's like, Modesto was the largest city to where I grew up. So yeah.
The one that got me on that one was it told me, like, all right, so I got Boston, which I did not think was terribly hard. But then it does like secondary places. And the secondary place for me was Rochester, New York, where my mom's family is from. And I was like, I don't even understand how you figured that out.
Amazing. One last question. This is from Chris, who said, the perfect segue, I'm thinking about getting Upgrade Plus, but I've been hesitant since the bonus content isn't in its own feed. How do you recommend going back and listening to all the past episodes, or should I just start listening going forward? It's sort of a bookend podcast question. First, Chris, thanks for thinking about getting Upgrade Plus. The way Upgrade Plus works is generally just we do an Upgrade Plus segment at the end of the show. So there aren't standalone episodes. It's true. I would say it's all just, I would go forward, but if you do want to go back and dip into the archive, just be a little more active. Make sure your podcast player has a chapter skip function and skip to Upgrade Plus, because there's a chapter for the Plus version always at the very end that just plays Plus. And depending on your podcast player, some of them will even let you like say only play this chapter with this name, and you could do it that way too. I think Castro does that. So
I was gonna say I am always amazed when people tell me they've gone back and listened to some of our older shows. Like, there's shows where that's fine. Like, people listen to, like, Total Party Kill because it's like, okay, it's a story. Fine. You want to start at the beginning, that's great. But, like, I love all of you out there, but please don't start at, like, clockwise 1 and listen to
they're available
600 episodes.
But you don't need to get the continuity. You know, the only person who would do that, it's John Syracuse.
I started at the beginning, Jason.
I like continuity. It's a Syracuse mode.
It's a little too Muppet, I think, for me.
Yeah, a little too Muppety there. John is a little Muppety, but not that
turn it
Muppety.
down a little bit.
Thank you for this episode. We have reached the end. You can send us your feedback, follow-up, and questions at upgradefeedback.com. I am still in charge of that, so be nice. I also wrote an awesome shortcut that automatically puts them on the clipboard formatted right so I can paste them in the show doc, because I'm not willing to live like Mike lives. Thank you to our members who support us, as mentioned earlier, with Upgrade Plus. We are going to take a couple extra kind of home tech questions from listeners in Upgrade Plus this time. And, of course, support Mike and his baby. I'm going to keep holding that baby up by
baby
being
loves
an
Upgrade Plus, let me tell you.
Subscriber. To be fair, the notes say Mike Hurley, if you want to buy a gift for Mike's baby, get yourself an Upgrade Plus membership. So it's Mike saying this. Mike's holding his baby up. I got some baby pictures the other day from Mike. Adorable baby.
Yeah.
And Mike has a very nice striped robe. Little comment: I've never really seen Mike's robe before, but when you're
you spent a lot of time in that robe and then sweatpants in that first couple months.
Absolutely. Sure. You can find us on YouTube and see our things that we like from Star Wars and Star Trek by searching for Upgrade Podcast. Thank you to our sponsors, Google, Gemini, and Ecamm Live, for supporting this episode, and thank you all for listening. And of course, thank you, Dan Moren, for taking some time away from your many other podcasts, including the one we do at Six Colors, to be here this week. I really appreciate it.
It is distinctly my pleasure. I love Upgrade. I really is one of the few shows I listen to every week. So it's always nice to be on because,
it's one podcast you don't have to listen to.
I don't have to listen to it this week. Yeah. So
hooray.
Thank you for that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back next time with yet another in the cavalcade of guest stars. Who will it be? I don't know. I actually do know, but I'm not going to tell you. And we will see you next time.